was going to say this coincided really well with a webinar that I attended this morning, which was from the Sea Change people talking about leaving revisited, why undergrads drop out of STEM courses and drop out of STEM careers, and absolutely lining up with how we make it impossible for students to want to be in the field, or make it impossible for them to be successful. So very discouraging in many respects.
I don't know if I mean, okay, I was taught in undergrad off of the traditional passive manner, basically I taught myself, and I don't want to say that it was, you know, discouraging. It's just that it's like, if you didn't already have a passion for it, it wasn't inviting, put it that way. But I don't, because there were definitely a few students that, that started off as non-majors with me that actually ended up as biology majors, or,
Really?
Yeah. So I, they found a passion through doing, different type of activities.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously the courses come with it. So they had to get with it, basically. But yeah, I would say the passive way, it's a bit uninviting, but it's not like, it doesn't tear you down. I don't think. But
Actually, one of the things they were talking about today was the way some introductory courses are taught. And I know it's not all, because when I took chemistry, Gen Chem as an undergrad, I loved it. Yeah. And looking back on it, it was not interactive, nor was my introductory biology, but I loved both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember if they were curved classes, but one of the take-home messages from the webinar this morning was how curving can really just kill the soul of someone who goes in, because it automatically makes you compete rather than just enjoy what you're doing. And the other interesting thing is that this is kind of related to the paper, they found that high ability students, so students who entered with high ACT, SAT scores, high math scores, high math background, who had every reason to do well in these STEM courses, sometimes were turned off by just the format of the introductory courses, because they were so instructor focused on spitting out information. Mm-hmm. There was no room for examining theory. There was no digging deeper. It was just kind of a recitation of facts approach. And so high ability students were turned away and dropped the course at almost the same rate as students who were about to get D's and F's. Wow. It was like, whoa, okay. So the very kinds of students that we wanted to be retaining, just were not impressed. And that was across the board, across all ethnic and racial groups. And anyway, won't go in too much more into what I heard this morning, but
it's the process though, right? That like, even if you're high ability and clearly you know what you're doing, that like, if it's just nobody's meeting you halfway in those interests, then you can still lose people just because they have aptitude or not. I mean, that's not enough.
Right.
Interesting thing for us to reflect on.
Mm-hmm. But in rereading this paper for today, I was really struck by the how it was both promising that those of us trying to do active learning and incorporate more active learning, it's very promising in that respect, that it could raise the boat for everybody, but even more so for underrepresented students. But then the caveat, the cautionary notice, if it's done well and if there's enough of it that students really are engaged in it.
Right. So the thing that I found interesting, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, were any of the statistics in this paper found significant? Because like looking at the graphs, they looks like there's overlap.
You know, I was trying to look at the supplementary material. See, I'm like, the supplementary material is 71 pages of all sorts of things, including the stats.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I gathered from that is that these are significantly different results.
Okay.
But it's true. I'm looking at figure 1 right now, especially 1B.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Should I put that up or would that? Let's see. Do I have the paper open? Yes. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Oh, host disabled attendee screen sharing. Well, okay, I forgot to get that organized before Mike had to leave. It does look in 1B as if those error bars are pretty close to each other, but apparently they don't overlap.
Mm-hmm. Because what I found like kind of consistent with that, and then their other figures, you know, they're saying that there's so much difference, and I just really don't see that in what they've presented, in the graphs that they've presented. And to me it speaks to, it's more than just the difference between like active learning and passive learning, but also like maybe it indicates a difference in learning styles. Like, so for example, like just because a professor conducts active learning doesn't mean that the different activities are resonating with people that learn differently. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's active learning that's just active and isn't really done to meet a learning objective. Then
Right. Yeah.
there's active learning that meets a learning objective but doesn't resonate.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yes, there are several places where active learning can fall apart or not achieve what you would hope.
Right. And I think that's like a little bit, when it comes to, especially, you know, me being a minority and also being a first generation, to go to a higher education, you know, institution, that always seems to be the missing piece. It's like, you know, we talk about pushing active learning, especially for STEM and everything, but we don't really talk about the difference. So how, you know, just wording things, you know, the order of how you teach, or the different examples that you use, you know, where one body of students are like, oh yeah, I understand that, that makes a lot of sense, and then the other body of students are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So now they might be even more confused. So
That was the kind of discussion that went on, I think, back when I was an undergrad, and they used to talk about sports analogies. And I never had any interest in sports, and people would talk about football plays and things, and I had no clue.
Right.
And so for me to take any kind of test that would be based on that underlying knowledge, forget it.
Right. I found that a lot of male PE teachers that taught, you know, like science class, or they would do that. Exactly what, yes, give those examples. Yeah.
One thing that's first of all, I guess my my overall impression of this paper is enormously complicated. You know, it's as a meta-analysis, looking at, well, first of all, looking at the number of studies that they didn't consider. They looked at a couple thousand papers and communicated with over 1,000 authors.
Yeah, it's pretty
And
impressive.
only came up with, was it 41 or 51 studies that they could actually use.
Yeah.
So the background work before they ever got to where they could really analyze data is just, to me, mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But then even when they have those few dozen, those are across different STEM disciplines. And you have the kind of variation. You know, you've alluded to some of it, Bree, which is, you know, is it active learning that actually resonates with somebody? And they explore it a little bit more in terms of, in figure 2, looking at individual courses. Not everybody's up on the upper left side, which is the good part of those graphs, because that would imply that the learning gaps had been eliminated. So some people who were doing active learning increased the achievement gap by what they were doing, which is just very discouraging. And then to overlay that with figure 4, looking at the intensity, which is all self-reported, so there are problems there. Yeah, this is a very tough paper, I think, to actually get a grip on.
So I am, you know, pretty new to examining research papers looking at, you know, education and how all that works. I mean, although yes, I taught, but during my master's, we really didn't do that for that to prepare us or anything. So I really have only gotten into this while I've been at UAB. And I don't know, it just, to me, it seems like there are certain things that like don't want to be discussed because they're a little, I think they may make people feel uncomfortable. And so I guess I'm wondering, is that a pattern that I'm really seeing even in the educational research side, or you know, do some papers or have some people started to discuss these things, like these subtle differences, like that turn into large differences, turn into enormous gaps, that we see even in this paper?
Can you give an example of some of the uncomfortable things that you think people aren't?
I mean, for example, what we're talking
jumping
about.
in to discuss.
Yeah, what we're talking about right now, you know, everyone is so adamant and gung-ho for the active learning, you know, getting their ticket for that train, that they might be missing, especially for minority or underrepresented students, there's another piece that we're missing, and it's a bit more, lack of a better word, cultural, you know. And because, I mean, still the climate is where the majority of those students will be taught by someone that does not look like them, that does not culturally resonate with them. And thus, is that being discussed? Because it's not being discussed in, you know, normal scientific research. But yeah, those like, yeah.
That's a good question. I know that there used to be literature that dealt with gender of the instructor and how that was received by students. And going back to early years of teaching for me, and teaching general biology and 600 students at a time, And I can remember instances either on student evaluations at the end of the term, or sometimes students would just come up to me and say, "Oh, this is so exciting to have a female science instructor." And I was like, oh, okay. Kind of caught me off guard because it wasn't something I focused on very much.
Right. Yes.
I certainly know that there are a lot of underrepresented students who do look at their instructors and say, doesn't look very much like me. There probably are people studying this. I don't know.
I'll have to do some
Do you have
digging.
any idea, Carlos?
I don't, and it's making me think. Of a couple of things came to mind. Like we've seen a couple of papers. I think it was a CBE paper on instructor talk, but that's instructor talk, and how they deliver messages and how or introduce activities that I think has a lot to do with success of active learning. But I remember this study that now I can't remember the details, but they looked at, it was an online class and they had 6 different instructors teach it or something like that. And then they had one person filter all communications. So all the email announcements that went through the learning management system were edited by one person. So, and then they measured perceived instructor friendliness, perceived, which was an interesting kind of a different take.
Yeah.
But we're seeing that my wife did some listening sessions with students. I may have to ask you questions. How many students did you do? 60. And one of the things that came up was that the instructor doesn't look like me. And if we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, like I see the gap here, which was really telling that students picked up on that. And the other one that students picked up on was the difference between research track and professional track teaching faculty and the demographics of both, which was.
And how do they react? Do they think one or another is a better teacher or is more approachable, or?
It's mostly they realize that most of the teaching faculty that are really engaged in the teaching are very different from the research faculty. I'm going to shout across the room, and is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, they said some things about, we'll take you seriously that you care about equity when we see you hiring diverse faculty, and we can see who's teaching and who's not. We can see this. It's not a secret.
Which to me was heartbreaking. That our students see this, and yeah.
I do know that when we hired an African American tenure track person in my department, who is from East Africa, and he's Muslim, and we have a pretty high Muslim population in the Twin Cities and on campus. It made a huge difference in our college, and he has lots of undergrad research assistants now, and a lot of them are Muslim women who I think were just dying to find someone that they felt comfortable working with.
connection.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But going back to your initial question, I, I don't think I've seen any, and not that I read all
Mhm.
all this, but I haven't seen anything that directly addresses that in a classroom plus active learning
Mhm.
study design.
Because I just feel like to, really make it what I feel like we all talk about, which is very effective, and even then, I mean, I do hear people talking about taking it outside of STEM, and taking it to all the courses and everything, that we shouldn't miss the mark like a lot of things, which is, oh, let's focus on all the positives and not address any of the issues, but to make it
Mhm.
truly effective and not having to go back and have to draw this whole thing over again. We need to address those issues that are very clearly large gaps, even again seen in this paper.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think it's very interesting. Yeah, like the grades or exam scores, it's like they're all pretty low. If like, mm,
Their graphs are really hard to interpret.
Well,
Maybe
yes, these are not
yeah.
for sissies. I was thinking I
No.
often have students interpret graphs and have them tell me how active learning can be helpful for passing or getting a good grade, but I would not give these to students, I don't
I
think.
was wondering if you would use this for your first slides or to introduce active learning in your class.
I mean, maybe figure one, that one's a little easier to interpret. Figure two gets pretty tricky because it's more than 2 dimensions as far as I can tell. It's kind of multi-dimensional.
I'll take
yeah, I
figure
wonder
one.
why they did that, why they didn't break it up and just decided to show. I mean, I guess they thought that there was a different, I mean, because everything seems to be clustered around the line. Doesn't I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. There's one enormous outlier in the exam score.
Yeah, yes,
There's an
exactly.
outlier in each of the diagonal quadrants or halves.
Wait, what? I forget. What does each dot represent? Doesn't each dot represent like a a whole course or
It's a
something?
whole course. Yeah,
Right.
it's one of the courses they evaluated, and there are. Where's my paper? Was 66%, 2 out of 3. I think it was 16 courses for 15. 10 of the 15 studies looking at exam scores. 10 of the 15 fall above the diagonal line. So they show a reduction in the achievement gap.
Mm.
But for the other 5 out of 15, active learning was better for the majority of students than for the minority underrepresented in science. Brian Dewsbury has any work going back to the race or ethnicity of the instructor and whether that, what kind of effect that has. I sort of have a sense he might be a person who's looking at that.
Mm.
The numbers are so small, there may not be ways to get statistically useful data.
Mm-hmm.
What's UAB like? What's your student population like, and what What are faculty? What do they look like?
Well, I don't want to say this out loud, but I think
It's
it'll
pretty white, isn't it?
it
I'll
certainly does
say it.
not represent the area that it's in, put it that way. And
That's what I thought.
right.
Yeah.
Or at least, okay, you see a lot of the workers, and I'm doing air quotes that you cannot see.
The staff.
Yes, are African American. And we're not talking about administrative staff. We're talking about,
Right.
the groundkeepers.
Yeah. Janitorial staff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Menial jobs.
I think that's very interesting with how much they verbally promote diversity,
Mhm.
They got me. They really did. I guess I fell for it a little bit, but yeah. And then when you do see underrepresented, it is usually international, and that's great. No, of course, we certainly need to see that as well, because that is a representation of America in general. But I will say, for African Americans and African American students that go there, we see that it is very apparent, and we certainly feel overlooked if there's any question about how we feel. And I feel pretty safe to say that the majority feel that way. Yeah.
Bree, you've got to be the one who is the leader.
That's what my grandmother says.
Well, you're getting close to getting your PhD, right? So you are, at least in the eyes of freshmen and sophomores in the school, you are a senior role model for them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I taught at the community college in Virginia, it's, very small place, rural place. And so there weren't any minority students there. But so I got my first set teaching a class at UAB. And yeah, very first class, it ends. And this young student comes rushing down. And I thought, I don't know, maybe she had like a probing question about the syllabus or something she read in a textbook or something. And she's just like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. You're African American and you have locks. Like, I just can't, I'm beside myself. And, I found out that she was from Illinois. And so I was a little, I guess, taken aback that she hadn't had a minority professor, being from there, because I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. So, just being up north. But I guess, our underrepresentation is everywhere. So not just down south. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as I can tell. Pardon?
I was just gonna say, I'd like to be a leader, but this COVID stuff, it has me first thinking about just landing a job. So
Yeah.
Are you applying right now?
Yes, I am actively applying. I'll be sending out, to all my contacts.
What job are you? What's your target or dream job?
Dream job is definitely teaching with a little bit of research, so that I can, introduce things that are still new and happening to my students. But I'd totally be fine at a community college where it's, more 100% teaching. But I'd also would be fine at a university where I just have a way larger teaching load than research load.
And what field?
I'm very comfortable teaching, truthfully, everything from general biology to what I do now, which is genetics and bioinformatics.
Oh.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm asking because I'm like, in case I hear something here, I'll be sure to send it your way.
Thank you. Yes, please do.
We talk a lot about diversity and recruitment, and I want to see some changes. We all do, but
yeah. So hopefully we can all make that happen.
now this paper has that's why I came back, Sue, because I'm like, I still don't think I understand understand all the filtering they did and all the just the number of classes and the number of just how they all the pre-work before actually doing the data analysis is.
Yeah, let me, I've got the supplement open here. Let me,
do they state in their supplement what specific like type of, yeah, okay, never mind. I see it here.
actually, I think part of what they
What do you need?
I would think that they would come out with another paper with, because of some of the papers that they had to exclude, you know, but
Yes.
there may have been tangible data there.
You know,
pretty strict criteria for what they would accept, because it had to be pairwise comparison, same instructor teaching both ways. Yeah, they looked at 1900 was the number that stuck in my mind. Oh, and I just found it and lost it again. They looked at this huge number. Oh, we screened 1,659 papers and other sources published between 2010 and 2016. Coded 1,294 of them that compared active learning versus passive learning classrooms. They found 210 of those that met all the 5 criteria and contacted them, as well as 187 people whose work was represented in the 2014 Freeman et al. Paper. And then they just had this army of people analyze this stuff.
For the calls, do they state if they had the same person taught, you know, like calling, or did they have
contact people?
Yeah.
I think they contacted them in writing.
Oh, okay.
But it's true that there may have been people who would have had the data but didn't have the time to write back to fill in, because you have to provide the race for all the students, and for some of them that's hard to get from the institution, or it just takes time and they didn't want to bother to do it. So there probably is a lot of untapped material there. And then controlling for student equivalence. So they have to show that in the 2 sections, the active learning and the passive learning section, that there were either equivalent students, or the ones that went into active learning classroom had lower credentials and had more to gain. And so they have to have access to either college entrance scores, or certainly you can get current GPA, or the GPA the student had before entering the course, unless they're I don't know, what do you do with a first term introductory course? Maybe they take high school GPA or something.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm looking at the data they posted on GitHub and the data availability link. It's a massive, well, two massive spreadsheets.
yeah. And for the studies that looked at exam performance, there either had to be an identical exam or an equivalent exam, and somebody had to be the judge to decide that two exams that were given were equivalent. So the backstory before they ever get data to look at is just mind-boggling to me.
Yep.
Oh, and then they tossed out any study in which the length of the class period was different between active learning and the passive learning. So I would have thrown out all our studies at the University of Minnesota, because when we switched, we did have people who taught under both conditions, or at least one person who did. And that would have been fine, except that we added an extra hour of class time per week. So that would have automatically, because we had a group work and we wanted students to have time in class to do group work rather than scheduling it outside of class. So I can imagine that there were a lot of potentially useful studies that they couldn't look at because it just didn't meet their rigorous criteria.
Yeah, differences.
Yeah, they're comparing,
I mean,
apples and kumquats and breadfruit.
I do like the rigorous criteria because it keeps,
Mhm.
Just not biased. It keeps them honest. And it's just really good work. I mean, to standardize everything, all of the papers. So.
What I thought was really, I've never heard this term before. Are you guys familiar with file drawer data?
No.
So in figure 3, to avoid sampling bias, my understanding of file drawer data is you did this analysis, you compared your active learning class with the passive learning class that you taught, and the students were similar and you gave them similar exams, so you met all the criteria, but you didn't see a result, so you didn't publish it. Or you saw the wrong results. You saw that active learning made it worse for somebody, so you didn't publish that. So that's a manuscript that stays in the file drawer and never gets sent out for review. And my understanding is that figure 3 is the way that they checked to make sure that they weren't only looking at success stories and weren't biased in that direction.
Yeah.
And so these cone plots or funnel plots show that the distribution is such that because they did see some courses in which the gap was actually made worse in active learning classes, they figured they had honest appraisals there and weren't deliberately pulling up papers that only met the answer that they wanted to get.
Which you can so easily do when doing this type of research.
Confirmation bias. Yes.
Yeah. I'm always impressed with studies like this where they have the really refined criteria. They have all the studies. They take into account the potential of bias and the drawer effect that I had not heard about, and I just took a note. And
I'm gonna eat gum.
Please don't eat gum on the couch.
I can eat gum.
But just finding the numbers and at the end to be able to make these conclusions is something else.
I got another gummy.
A whole different level. Can you go over there and give me some room?
The other thing we don't know that I think would be interesting to know, in figure 2, where you do have courses that don't help the achievement gap, but actually make it worse. It'd be interesting to know what disciplines those were in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is there a certain type of course that you really want to think twice before you try setting up an active learning version of it?
Yeah.
Or are those more instructor dependent? Or
I'm surprised they didn't give those any. I mean, they didn't even talk about it at all in the discussion.
But that's a really great point. Is it content dependent or instructor dependent?
Mm-hmm.
That would make a really interesting study. I would be interested in knowing what we can or can't do to avoid worsening the gap.
Yeah. I mean, the same is true with figure 4, which they kind of say is explaining why there are courses that, active learning courses, that actually make the problem worse. And I think what they're trying to say is that it's because these are courses that use such low intensity active learning that they just don't make the cutoff. They aren't really doing it well enough or doing it quantitatively enough to make a difference.
Okay, I have a silly question, and I wondered about this when looking at the paper. Is it fairly standard to break it down into low intensity and high intensity, or is this something they came up with? And
I think it was their only recourse, because they mentioned somewhere that there just aren't enough of these courses that have been analyzed by any standard protocol like COPUS or RTOP or any of the other many observation protocols. So they're just relying on the instructor. And we know that can be really, really inaccurate.
yeah.
Probably if someone says that they don't do it very much, that's probably true. but for the others.
I do like how, I mean, I feel like they're pretty honest. So I do like how figure 4B, it basically shows it's like, if you are going to do active learning, you need to do it, all in. Because if you just try, then it's going to be worse. Like you're just going to, probably, I don't know, bore and confuse the students all at the same time.
I had a little comment in the margin there, wondering if the bad results with low intensity active learning were a result of tentative instructors, people who were just trying to learn what to do and were tentative, and students can sense that. I always say students are like dogs, they sense fear, take advantage of it. Or if it's an instructor who's just not experienced, maybe isn't fearful of it, but is just not doing it real well, or just doesn't do it enough so that the students value it and buy in.
Yeah. And it's that buy-in and being convincing. And I know I still mess it up. It's in some cases how to introduce the activity so that they take me seriously. And it's funny because I see it with we have teaching postdocs, and I see every new teaching postdoc approach maybe one activity we do differently, and in some cases it works, and then in another case it doesn't, and the students complain about it, or they don't do well on those concepts on the exam. And I keep on thinking, this is just really the not being familiar with it or not being confident with your way of introducing this think, pair, share, or this Poggle-esque activity, and designating teams. And they may be reading the script or have a script, but it doesn't come off as convincing. It's
Yeah.
I find it
What
really
do you mean, like
fascinating.
introducing? You mean literally them just introducing it, or the whole, them going through the whole activity? It's just like it's a little rough waters.
I would, I would say the whole activity, but the introduction for some, in my case, is where I go wrong usually.
Because I don't know, sometimes, yeah, like my introduction is a little rough, but I always try to make sure that the students know exactly what I'm talking about before moving on. Like if the introduction is rough, then, I say it probably instead of repeating it 2 or 3 times, I'll repeat it like 4 times because, it's the third, fourth time that really made sense. And so I have to repeat it to them one more time. And then they're like, okay, I understand what we're doing and why. But
And you just reminded me of something that I've been trying to hold myself more accountable. This transparency in why I'm doing certain activities and why I'm setting up the course this way. And there's this notion, I'm forgetting the name of the group, but it's tilt and transparent assignments. And making sure your assignment prompts are Claire does it really well. I'm not so well, but I've been doing it with every week I do 2 blog posts on our course forum on the course design and what I expect from you in this week's assignments, what I expect you to connect and learn. And it's funny because it helps me rationalize why I'm doing stuff. But I got a really nice comment yesterday saying, thank you for explaining early on why we were doing this in group and then individually, because then it helped me really figure out why I needed to work in a team.
I'm 5.
You are 5.
I'm not going to say how old I am. Forget it.
Transparency, and maybe that helps with buy-in, right? They find you more approachable and believe you.
yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, transparency definitely. Even if you are like trying something and you're kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing, I feel like the students are there with you as long as they know, like, oh, you're not trying to, I don't know, act like you don't know, act like you do know what you're doing when you kind of are just learning with them. I think they definitely like that. They appreciate it.
Vulnerability is a great tool.
Yes.
Just being willing to let students see that, yeah, either you're still learning something, or for me, it's, I don't know the answer to that, and just being willing to say that really breaks down a lot of barriers, I think. I'm doing a quick Google search here on the race of instructor influence on student success, and the only thing I can find, it's K through 12 stuff and more of the other way around, the effect of the race of the instructor on bias on student evaluations. So maybe there isn't very much at the college level.
Maybe that is, something I need to tap into then.
Yeah, the one thing that's in Inside Higher Ed, it talks about the fairness of teacher perceptions of students. Which brings me back to one of my favorite topics, which is the growth mindset or fixed mindset. If an instructor goes in and says, oh, all students in this category are not likely to do well, I don't have high expectations for them. You can sense that too. And see
Yes,
that one
you
coming.
can see it a mile away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I teach labs, and we usually have a research project. So they are cure-like courses because we have grad students too. And I'm getting better at this sales pitch, but it's basically we're all here to be a scholarly community and co-create together because we have no idea what we're gonna get. Right? So I'll say I don't know very often, and you're also going to hear you're not there yet, but I'll provide some feedback, and I want you to learn how to improve. And my colleague really works on growth mindset and is interested in growth mindset, and I realized how much connections between co-creation and growth mindset we have. You have to stop.
Well, I think we are reaching the end of our time. Oh, wait. Oh, is the paper? 2010. J. Price. Let's see what this says. The effect of instructor race and gender on student persistence in STEM fields. Results indicate Black students are more likely to persist in a STEM major if they have a STEM course taught by a Black instructor. Similar to previous findings, female students are no more likely to persist when more of the STEM courses are taught by female instructors. Okay.
That's because
So
females we succeed. But
women
I
are
mean,
just
we
used
like
to
it.
pushing on. Yeah.
I mean, it makes a difference to us.
Yeah. So Joshua Price, Cornell University, ILR school. I don't know what that refers to. The Digital Commons ILR.
If you could send me that, like the link.
Sure.
Yeah, I would be curious too.
Yeah, okay. Sure. One of the interesting little bits of data that came up this morning was that women, and this women, and I think it was especially underrepresented women, are more likely to drop a course even though their GPA is higher than the men. I mean, women and underrepresented minorities with a GPA above 3.5 have a much higher possibility of dropping a course if they feel they're not doing well. And they might feel they're not doing well if they get a C. Mm-hmm. Whereas white guys can be getting a D and think that they're just fine. Nothing's wrong here. So the point seemed to be, and the group presenting this morning were a combination of psychologists and what I would call hard scientists. And they decided that women just go into college with higher expectations of themselves and are much more likely to view setbacks as catastrophic. So kind of interesting that they were going through the data at just a breakneck speed, and I was trying to take notes, and I'm sure I'll get a link to this thing, and I'll see if I could post it on one of the Palm sites, because it really was interesting. The breakdown of looking at different demographic groups, and so underrepresented minorities, first-gen students, students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, so Pell eligible, women versus men. Interesting stuff to look at. Well, we've gone over. I think we should stop. Thank you guys for showing up.
Yes.
We had
thank
an
you for
extra
the
one.
session.
Yes, good. Hello. What's your name?
What's your
Young
name?
dollar?
Amanda.
Amanda. Hi. Are you just 5 or are you 5.5 or something?
I'm gonna be 5.5 in a few.
Yep. In a few months?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you're maybe 5.25. I know it's really important at that age to get it right.
Boy, does she have energy. And she's doing online kinder, which is another set of interesting.
And I do my meetings at school. I want Ollie to go to the same school as me, but he does his meetings at home.
Her meetings are meetings with kindergarten teachers. I'm amazed with what everyone's doing.
I finished Weddle. I finished the letters in Weatherland.
You finished all the letters in Leatherland.
Good.
Wow.
Look, someone had a successful day.
Yes.
Apparently. Wow.
Yay! I finished all the Weatherland.
Yeah.
Do I go to a new Daddy? Tomorrow I go to a new language.
You go to a new language.
Yeah, I know.
class.
I go to a new language tomorrow.
Okay, Amanda, we have to wrap it up.
And I got a new-
We're
else
going to wrap
some
it
of us-
up, and I can't stop the recording otherwise. So,
Yes.
I got
Bye, you
a
guys.
new
Thanks.
language
Bye,
bye,
tomorrow.
Bree. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.